This is a 58 or 59 bug, and if you look, you can see the feed pipe from the brake fluid reservoir going into that grommet. It's a little crooked now because I fiddle with it so I could get the gas tank out, so I kind of moved it around a bit. But if you look at it, you can see it goes up. See it? How it goes up. Now the reservoir is right here. You can see the hose, and it's just a little. The bottom of the reservoir is probably a quarter inch above that, or half an inch above this point right there. So this person has all new brakes. He's got new disc brakes in the front. The caliper bolts are on one side. One of the caliper bolts is 0.010 of an inch away from the turning rotor. That can be solved by grinding the tip of the bolt down a couple millimeters, and that should be fine. It's really close, so that's an issue. Both sides. This side's really bad. Passenger side, 1/10 of an inch. I mean, 1/10 of 0.010 should be 40 minimum. So what happens is you can't bleed the brakes in this car. It's got new front brakes, new rear brakes, new metal lines all the way around. Everything's fine except this hose. Now think of this. If you're on the top of Mount Everest and you start walking down, you're going to go down most of the time unless you fall off. But if you're walking down at whatever established trail that thing actually has, you're going to go up and down a little. You know, you're going to go down, then you're going to go up a little, then you're going to go back down. But there's one thing on a car that can't do that, and it's the reservoir hose. It goes from the reservoir to the master cylinder. Later models, they're different. They have the reservoir up here on the side, over here, right about there, and the hoses go almost straight down to the master cylinder. So those are hard to screw up, but this one's really easy to screw up, because if it does anything like this, or like I said about the mountain, and I met that, and that's an absolute fact. No undulations upwards, no downward loops. Like if this was upside down, it would never work either, you know? On a later one, you have to pay attention to this, to your little pipes. See the pipes? These are the pipes. See how they stick up? When you put them in and just look at them, they'll point in a certain direction. After it's installed, you want them to be on the same angle, give or take a couple degrees. You sure don't want it to look like this. You might not ever bleed it. But this car will never bleed. Now you could say, well, we'll put a pressure dealie on it. And well, there's no threads. Okay? Now you could change this and put a different one on it, which I'll tell you why you shouldn't do that next. But you could also try sucking it out with they make suction pullers, suction bleeders. I've tried to use one of those, and what was happening is it was sucking air between the threads of the bleeder screw and the wheel cylinder itself. So I thought, well, I just threw that thing away. It was from Craftsman. But I think they're all about the same. So the way I do it is this. You see this? That's my drain pan. My hose is connected up over the wheel. It goes so the wheel cylinder is down here. This hose is connected to it. It goes up and it goes over the wheel. And so when everything's normal, and particularly that hose up in the front, all I have to do is get in the car and start pumping. And eventually the fluid will start coming out of that hose, and my brakes will be bled for that wheel. And then I'll do the other side. That's an excellent way to bleed the brakes. It really works. And this thing here, this pipe, is the correct pipe, but it's too long. And the hardest part about getting this thing to fit is getting it so it's on the proper angle everywhere, where it's got a downhill 100% slope, and getting this hose right, which means I'm pretty sure this pipe is too long. So I'm going to have to figure out I'm going to have to do a lot of fiddling and cutting a little teeny bit more, cut a little teeny bit more until I get it to a point where it's about a half an inch away from the end of the pipe on the reservoir. Then I can put a piece of hose on it, and it'll cover a half of an inch of this pipe and a half of an inch of this pipe, and there'll just be a little bit of hose in between, a gap between here and there, maybe even less. But it's got to be laid out flat, almost conforming to this concentric, or whatever you want to call it, with this surface. I think it's missing a tab. Maybe it's under these tie rods. Now, because this thing has been lowered, this gap here between this is big. Even when it's on the ground, it'll go higher. When they're stocked, this is a lot closer. So you got to keep a good eye on your pipe, so it doesn't touch this. This one's got a new single master cylinder, which I don't know if that's a good idea with the disc brakes or not, but anyway, that's a whole nother story. But regardless, it's new, so it's going to stay here. But what was I going to say? If you're going to put a later one in, you're going to have to use the plastic pipe type. You're going to have to, what I suggest is use this reservoir. Don't buy this 67 bug one or whatever because it looks like it'll fit. It'll never fit. You'll be there forever. You use this, and then you make a Y. You're going to have to braze it and make a Y out of pipe. Maybe some of this. In fact, this is the diameter you really want to use. And make a Y and place it. You have to do a lot of playing around with hoses and, just fiddling, trying to figure out exactly where you want to put that Y. Because you still have to maintain that downhill thing, that downhill trend. Zero undulations. This comes into play on like a 68 bus. Those are tricky. You might have to reform the reproduction pipe by placing like wire inside of it and then trying to bend it with using a heater, like a blow dryer. What do they call those things? A heat gun. Using a heat gun on it. Be careful because it probably melts pretty easy. If you try to, I rigged one with hose from Home Depot, and that's when I first realized this was happening, because my hose had a dip in it, kind of the opposite of this, but not even as far. It had a little dip, and because you can operate the brake pedal on a bus while you're laying underneath it, I was operating and I could see the bubble in the hose that I'd put on, because the old hose was terrible. It was all broken. It wasn't the original. And it needed a reservoir. They snapped the nipple of the reservoir off, putting stupid hose on it. But anyway, I could see the bubble in the hose, and that's when I knew what was wrong, and that's how I learned about this. And the reason that bus was there, that 68 bus, that could have been a 70, 68, 69, or 70, one of the three. That car had every single part on the brakes was new, and it still just had a terrible pedal height. And here's another thought. The late buses, like with disc brakes, they have that pressure regulating valve for the front and rear brakes. There's none for sale on the internet except used ones. You can get a rebuilt one somewhere, and you can look around and find one. And but the thing is nobody ever touches them because you can't buy one, so why touch it? Because they don't usually leak. If they leak, that's not what's wrong with it. It's internal. Because it's not a matter of just sealing it back up. And so if you pull the thing apart, you're going to see some seals. And if you go on the internet, you can find seals for those things. And don't get too scientific about not being able to hone it out perfectly. But if you can go on the internet, just like type in little tiny hydraulic seals and see what happens. You can use numbers, millimeters, and things like this. But they don't have to be perfect. They just have to fit, And if they have the same profile, like a wheel cylinder cup, from the side, it looks like an arrow shape, fluted. That's what you're going to have to put in there, and they're out there, and you can fix those things, and they really matter because when they don't work, it feels like the servo's not working, but everything works, but it doesn't stop right. If it does that, that's what it is. It's that proportioning valve. So, but there's everything that you didn't know about brakes, and it's just simple stuff. Because how complicated could it be to put this hose in? That's super easy. You really almost don't even need any tools. You can just cut some, well, you have to cut the hose and put it on. But the simplest things make things really terrible, and this is one of them. And that proportioning valve, it's really shocking that there's like 10,000 companies out there making master cylinders and wheel cylinders and tie rods and all kinds of disc brake parts, but nobody makes that. They act like you don't need it, but you do. That's all I know.